to Graying Rainbows, the podcast community for people coming out LGBT plus later in life. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell, and today we'll be talking with Wes Enos, founder of the Generations Project. Before I tell you a little bit more about Wes, I want to remind you that you can find complete show notes along with more episodes of Graying Rainbows at grayingrainbows.com. In fact, I'm hoping that by the time this episode airs, our new website will be up and running with additional resources. As always, you can email me at grayingrainbows@gmail.com or record voice feedback at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis or use the SpeakPipe app. Wes Enos is the founder and executive director of the Generations Project, which is a nonprofit organization committed to fostering dialogue and community building across diverse LGBTQ populations of different ages. They create live events with a focus on storytelling and other unique approaches. He's going to tell us about his work, and after the interview, I'll be back with a few highlights and closing comments. My guest today is Wes Enos. It's great to have you on the show today, Wes.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Wes is the executive director of the Generations Project. Will you tell us what that is and how you became involved?
Yeah, well, it's called the Generations Project, and I started it 4 years ago for many reasons, but I guess it really starts with where I come from. I grew up in a retirement town on the Oregon coast. Retirement meaning primarily 70% or more of the people who live there are retired. And the town itself had about 6,500 people who live there. And the closest town to it on the Oregon coast is 27 miles away. And there are 3,000 people who live there. So it's really pretty isolated where I come from. It's a rural conservative area. But much of my life was benefited from growing up and part of a church and having this intergenerational upbringing. And I was gay, and I was very uncomfortable growing up there. And I lived in the shadow of 5 siblings. I was the youngest of 6. And both my parents were teachers at my high school, the only high school in town. They both were teachers and coaches at the high school, and they each taught my siblings and all their siblings' friends. And everyone would talk about my dad's history class. He taught 10th grade world history, and everyone loved this history class. He somehow found a way to make history come to life. When I finally got to high school, after growing up and constantly visiting my parents in their classrooms in the high school, my freshman year of high school, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And my 10th grade year, the year I was supposed to take his history class, he had passed away. And I had to sit in this history class every single day. And I really just grew to hate history or really not want anything to do with it. The only thing I wanted to do at the time was graduate from my high school, come out and live somewhere where I could be gay and start my own life. And by the time I was ready to finish high school, I had received scholarships to attend San Francisco State University. I would move there months after high school, and everyone I had grown up with at the time were like family to me. It was a really small town. I had really great friends growing up, but I grew up hearing homophobic slang or terms everywhere, at church, at school, my best friends, my family members. I was really preparing myself to say goodbye to everyone coming out. Weeks before moving to San Francisco, I started to write everyone letters and tell everyone I was gay and letting them know I'm moving to San Francisco. And the reaction was the complete opposite of what I expected. Everyone was really, really loving and caring and surprised or not surprised and wanted to talk and have conversations. It was really cool. So a lot of that happened on an ongoing basis. And my time spent in San Francisco, I was there from 2005 to 2010. I was really living the dream of a young gay person living in San Francisco at that time. And I had a lot of good friends, and we'd go out dancing and We'd get like brunch together, do all these things I never imagined doing when I was younger. And while I was waiting tables at home restaurant, I said something to one of my coworkers. I'm changing my major, and no matter what I do with my life, I don't want to be one of these lonely older gay men eating breakfast by themselves, because I had ignorantly not even imagined myself in their shoes. And my coworker turned to look at me and said, that older gay man you're talking about, or these older gay men, I've seen them with their friends. They used to go out dancing all night, just like you do. They would go get breakfast together in the mornings, just like you do. And over the years, I've watched them pass away. And now it's just them eating breakfast alone by themselves. And it really, really impacted me to hear that. And I don't know what, I guess in a way I do know what led me to say something like that, but I completely regretted it someone had said something. I went home and I started to do a little research, and I found some documentaries to watch. And later that week, I changed my major to history, and I learned at San Francisco State University, they have one of the first ethnic studies programs, and they teach history through the perspectives of all kinds of people, not just the white perspective I had learned while growing up in Oregon. I found a way to love history again. After graduating with my degree in history, I worked in San Francisco for another year, and then moved to Buenos Aires and became an English teacher. And I taught English as a second language to businesses and individuals. And after that, I wanted to move to New York City and found a way to work that out. When I arrived to New York City, I was really, really blown away at the history and the culture and how many LGBTQ people live here, but how difficult it is to feel a sense of community, perhaps because there's just so many. 1 or 2 years after moving here, I moved here in 2011 or 2012, I was at a party in Hell's Kitchen. I must have been 25 or 26 at the time, and I was speaking with a younger group of guys who were like maybe 20 or 21, and they said something like, gay men over the age of 40 shouldn't be allowed in gay bars. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was so shocked, but then I saw myself in them, and I sort of understood where they're coming from, and I tried to say something, and I did, to try to prove that we should be grateful. And after that, I just became really affected and passionate about not letting my generation, or not wanting my generation, to become known as the generation that forget those who helped pave the path for us. I started to talk about that a lot for a couple of years. And I think 2 or 3 years later, I was speaking to one of my friends about this idea of creating this storytelling show that would feature older LGBTQ people as storytellers to help younger people understand the journeys that led us to where we are today, and sort of create an organization that paid homage to those journeys and those individuals. And in June 2015, we had our very first event, and it was hosted by my friend who I had that conversation with about 6 months prior, who happened to be one of the original actors in Kinky Boots, the Broadway show. And he really helped step up to make it a really impactful intergenerational program that brings people, LGBTQ people and allies of all ages, together to preserve the history of the LGBTQ movement through intergenerational storytelling.
How often do you get groups together?
So what we're doing now is we have intergenerational storytelling workshops that we're conducting, and we are also having time capsule creation gatherings. So I guess it used to be every 3 months we'd have an event, and now in 2019, our goal is every month, or some months we'll have multiple events, so at least leading up toward the 50th anniversary of Stonewall.
Right. Well, that's exciting. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to try to come to New York City for that or not. Given that I haven't even been to my first Pride event yet, I'm thinking that might be a bridge too far, but I might have to start with my local.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting for this Pride, obviously it's the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, and that's exciting. It's also World Pride. But there's a group called Reclaim Pride who a lot of them are the original members of the Gay Liberation March from 1970. They formed this march called Reclaim Pride, and they're upset that the Pride Parade that you see on TV has been, in their words, taken over by corporations, and other cities, groups like this are forming and actually stopping the Pride Parade. So it's somewhat of a nice thing. Right now I'm in the learning phase of it all, but there'll be two parades this year. One will be a lot of the original members of the first Pride March, and then the other will be the other one that's been very popular. So anyway, there's a lot of ways to celebrate Pride in New York this year.
Yeah, so it happens that, because I'm a little of a history buff myself, and one of the things I learned recently, because I just interviewed Susan Stryker, who wrote Transgender History, for years in the early days of the Pride Parade, trans people were excluded. Unfortunately, schisms are nothing new. Schisms have been going on as long as there's been a movement.
I believe that.
If someone wanted to do something like what you are doing, then I guess coming to one of these storytelling workshops would be a good thing to do.
Yeah. Right now we're a nonprofit organization. We're still in our grassroots stage. I started this idea just through volunteers, and we had it all operating with volunteers, and we still need a lot of volunteers to produce our programming. But now as we have moved forward and we're a nonprofit organization, it's still just me creating the programming, and we're fundraising to obviously grow the organization, and we're hoping to create more programming. But if anyone would like to participate, they can contact us on our website, thegenerationsproject.org. And we do have a lot of the ways we're recruiting people to join, whether they want to volunteer and help us produce more programming or help facilitate a workshop, is to invite people to join our intergenerational storytelling workshops. And the more people we have who inquire, the easier it is to produce these storytelling workshops. And they're free for now, and we may have more ongoing storytelling workshops that are more open to the public, because the ones we have now are certainly open to the public, but they're through existing centers. Like we'll have one at AARP, and we'll have one at the Edie Windsor Stage Center in Midtown New York, and then we'll have one at Griot Circle in downtown Brooklyn. So we're having all three of those coming up, and if anyone's interested, they can go to our website and hit the contact button.
So I'm interested in exploring what you've learned from listening to the stories from both sides of the generational spectrum. Is there a lesson from the older members that stands out for you?
Oh, well, so many. I mean, I think the first lesson, and probably the greatest lesson I learned when I started this, was I didn't know anyone really when I moved here. And when I was really starting it 3 years after living here, I didn't know anyone over the age of 40, and I was 27, 28 at the time. So for me, it was really one-sided, because I was with younger people who wanted to learn from the older generation. And what I quickly learned, it was very one-sided. And the wonderful people who were helping me grow the organization, who were people of all ages, started to realize that too, and started to slowly let me know that they had just as much interest to learn from younger people as younger people have to learn from older people. I was really surprised I hadn't even thought about that. And it really was part of a beautiful thing to grow the organization, to hear both sides and create the platform where before our storytelling shows, we have conversations about the theme and make sure it is an intergenerational group coming together to present their stories that portrays one of the many themes we have at our storytelling events, which themes from our storytelling events range from first times, which is quite open to any first time one could think of, to the history of pride, to coming out, to how fashion has helped LGBT people become more visible. So the themes go on and on. We love creating these themes, and we create them through our storytelling workshops. But I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned, there's been so many. I think loneliness really resonates with me. How older generations, I don't think it's just the older, I think it does, regardless of all of our ages, everyone experiences loneliness. I think maybe it's definitely more difficult when your close friends and loved ones around you, your support groups start to die. And that's been a difficult lesson to learn, but also something that I've experienced in my lifetime, and I'm continuing to experience this because I become friends with the storytellers also, and unfortunately we've lost a few. But I think loneliness is something that we all ought to talk about, and it's not necessarily a fun conversation, but it's also an important one. I think everyone feels it in some way all the time. Not all the time, but sometimes.
Yeah, I just got done interviewing Rhodes Perry, who's written this excellent book called Belonging at Work, and he talks about how one reason why belonging at work is important is because we're living in a loneliness epidemic, really. Interacting with people online is not a substitute for face-to-face interaction. And I hope young people are coming to appreciate that that's the case.
Yeah, I'd say to that, that's a lesson for us all. One of the many reasons I started the Generations Project was I felt people my age at the time are really forming communities online easier and quicker than in person. And it was becoming an issue. Even if you wanted to put your phone away for a week and try to meet people at bars, everyone else was still using their phones for everything. And that's just how it is now. And everyone is on their phones inside bars and we wanted to create a space where we could remind people how to meet in real life. And that's almost all of our live storytelling events have that energy of meeting someone while you're there of a different age. We build an LGBTQ timeline at each of our events, essentially like a portable magnetic timeline. And I've collected 500 newspaper clippings from the 1920s to the present day that all contain LGBTQ historical moments or movie quotes or songs or anything relevant to the LGBTQ movement. And as people enter, you take something the year or decade you were born and hang on this timeline. And we have people ready to engage with people who have questions about the LGBTQ historical moment that each person receives. And we sort of already create like this energy of connecting with someone of a different age as you enter, while having the audience collectively build like a really nice constructed LGBTQ timeline each event that really creates a visual representation of our history. And it's a great gateway into sitting down and listening to a curated storytelling show.
So what do you think the biggest, and I realize you're at a disadvantage to answer this question because you're on the other side, but from feedback you've gotten from the older people, what's a major lesson that they have gotten from the younger people?
I think it's been a pattern for the older generation to learn from younger people certain new elements of being a little more carefree, I guess. I know I love talking about this with people, and sometimes we bring it up in a storytelling workshop or just in conversation. What people who were in their 20s and 30s and the 70s and 80s, what was the older generation thinking of them, and what kind of conversations did they have? And there just seems to be a pattern of the next generation being a little more carefree, and it's not like a pendulum yet. You know how things sway? I feel like it just keeps getting a little bit more extreme, and I'm curious if it's ever going to, when I'm 30 years from now, the next younger generation will start to be a little less carefree. But it just seems like I think a lot of younger people can show older people how to be a little more carefree, which is not always necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. But I think it's a lesson that anyone can benefit from, learning how to make a less big deal out of something that doesn't need to be a big deal. But when it's a big deal to you, it could seem like the biggest deal in the world. Having those conversations really help people of different ages come to terms with that.
What do you think is the biggest source of misunderstanding between generations?
Well, I think there's a big misunderstanding that younger people don't care about the older generation. I believe wholeheartedly that we all want to care. Sometimes we just don't know how to care, or we're not given the opportunity to connect to care. So, we've become a day and age when we're on our phone. Most people carry their phones on them every hour of the day. And that's just how things are now. And that certainly has changed us and changed how we form communities. Some for the better. Some people, it's easier to connect, but sometimes that makes it difficult also. the main misconception is we don't have enough opportunities to connect, and we all have untapped interest to connect with someone of a different generation, particularly us as LGBTQ people who have a different family structure or don't really have those opportunities all the time. I mean, some of us do, of course, but I'd say generally a lot of us, we have friend networks within our own generation, so haven't really had very many opportunities to connect in those spaces that allow us outside of like a work relationship or a party maybe, or occasional conversation in a bar. Where do younger and older people get to really have conversations in our community?
Right. And if you live in a community where being out is not as easy, you might not even know the people that belong to the other generations, even though you're both LGBT. I mean, like in the community that I live in, it's still very common for older people to stay closeted. I mean, they can't see that they have anything to gain by coming out. Have you had the opportunity to meet people that were coming out later in life?
You know, I have. I've met people who haven't come out before, or maybe had come out to like one younger person, and that younger person wanted me to really meet this person to connect. And I would tell him about the Generations Project, see if he'd ever want to come out with us or need help. And he decided not to come out. And then that's someone so closeted. But then I've met people who have come out 2 or 3 years ago, and they're like in their 40s or 50s. But I haven't met too many people who have recently just come out who are 16 over. But I feel like I know a few people in the closet.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
But what's really interesting about that is when I meet people who have come out the same year, but are different ages. And it's sort of fun to say we've been LGBTQ for 10 years together, or we're both 10 years old, and find those similarities. It's fun within the community, or we do that a little bit with the Generations Project.
That's an interesting idea. One of the problems I had, I came out at 60, and even though I have quite a few friends that I've known all along, when I came out and I asked them, well, how do I meet somebody? Well, now they're all my age. They're all in long-term relationships. Well, not all, but most. And so they're like, I don't know what to tell you. I haven't been anywhere in forever. We stay home. So it's an interesting challenge. For starting this show, I'm not trying to narrow down the definition of later in life too hard, because I think it depends, because now people are coming out so young, or at least it seems that way to people my age.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting now about coming out is for younger people in particular, 10, 15 years ago, gay or LGBT people were still sort of a myth, maybe more closer to 15 years ago. They weren't really around on mainstream media, or at least where I came from, and I didn't know any gay or LGBT people back then. And so in a way, like, I felt a little safer because there weren't examples. So I don't really know what it's like for people in conservative areas who are gay or LGBTQ, and have it be so known that LGBTQ people exist and how that could potentially put a target. I think my heart goes out to all of them. And all I could say, if that's you, regardless of your age, there is a community for you somewhere, and they're usually in cities. So I hope it becomes easier and easier. And I think it will. It does become easier the more of us who come out.
Yeah. And my goal is to create a community, an online community for older people, because I know there's a lot of people that aren't living in cities. And it might not be so easy.
Yeah. I'm someone who comes from a small town, and if I wasn't living in New York City, there's part of me that would move to a small town. And what I learned just from my conservative small town, a small LGBTQ group formed at my high school, and this is the second time it formed, and there's been backlash in the community. And the reason it stayed together is because they found a way to reach the alumni of our high school, and a few of us have been checking in to keep it going. And if you're living in a small town, you don't know what's going on around you until you start to look, because they don't know how to find you and you don't know how to find them unless you start doing some research on the local LGBT groups in high schools, and it could really impact your life to get involved with something like that. And I imagine you'll find a great support group.
I want to take a moment to thank you for listening to Graying Rainbows and sharing it with others. Don't forget to subscribe in your favorite podcasting app. And also, don't forget to listen all the way to the end of this episode so you can learn how to qualify for an Amazon gift certificate. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from your work with the Generations Project?
For me, I've always been more of a listener than a speaker, and always been really uncomfortable speaking or on stage. I started the whole Generations Project really limiting every moment on stage to give those moments to others, because that's where I was comfortable. But I've learned the value in knowing my own story and how to share it. That has given me more value. Just having that confidence or knowledge of how to share my own story has probably been the biggest impact. But the greatest pleasure has been hearing so many other people's stories, and through them learning where mine fit, or really taking the time to reflect on my own life.
Right. That's what makes stories so powerful, is that if you really listen, you can always find something in anyone's story that resonates with you.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty in intergenerational storytelling. It's a really beautiful thing when you get people different ages on the stage talking about a similar experience, or similar, what I call them, threads in the LGBTQ movement.
Can you think of any surprises along the way that stand out in your mind?
I've just been really surprised about how meaningful this is to people. When I was first starting the project, I really met a lot of older gay men who had lost someone during the AIDS epidemic. It's really where I was drawn, and I had never really had conversations with people who had lost someone, and to people who I met and learning their stories. And a lot of them had never or hadn't spoken about their friends in maybe over 10 years. And those moments, watching them open up, because sometimes we work with our storytellers for up to a year before they actually share their story at our events. So we'd spend a lot of time getting people ready to share like a 7-minute story on the stage, and really be surprised at how long people had waited to talk about certain things, and how storytelling really opens the door for a lot of others. I really feel most people who share a story at our event, something is released inside them when they share their story to a community of LGBTQ people and allies who value their story.
Is there anything you think would be particularly helpful to people like me, who are coming out later in life?
Well, I feel like I have a million questions for you. I feel like the greatest lesson and purpose in life is to learn and to get back. And if you were in the position to do either of those, there's so many new ways to learn from people your own age and younger people who are just as much interested to learn about you as you might be to learn about them somewhere. And you might need to be the one to initiate it or make a call. The other is to give back. And I really think trying to leave the world better than how we found it is what greater reason to find purpose of your life. So I don't think it's ever too late to find a way to give back. And it's often very rewarding.
I recently talked to an older gentleman who was actually, I think, part of that gay liberation front. And he said, it's very close to what you said, actually. He said, you don't want to die with what if? What if I had come out and it could have made a difference to somebody?
I'm inspired by anyone who comes out, regardless of your age. I remember when I was younger, I thought I would take it to my grave. I know a lot of people feel that way and still feel that way. So it's one of the greatest steps you can take, but sometimes the last step is the first step also.
Well, you've shared an awful lot with us today, Wes. Is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, the Generations Project also creates time capsules. So this is another way people can become involved with the Generations Project. I've created 5 time capsules in my lifetime. 2 of them have already been with the Generations Project. We created a SAGE time capsule at the Edie Windsor SAGE Center that'll be opened every year for the purpose of bringing LGBTQ people and allies together for a once-a-year event to hopefully foster intergenerational connections by creating a time capsule and answering questionnaires, doing free writing exercises. And we also have like photo printing activities. We can bring something for like essentially a show and tell. We have that time capsule at the Edie Windsor Stage Center. And then we have the Leap Night time capsule that's open every February 29th, every 4 years for Leap Night. And it's a similar concept as the other time capsule. And next, we're creating the Stonewall 50 time capsule, which will be a physical manifestation of the LGBTQ movement. We are building it now until June 2020. We are basically transcribing all of our stories that were told in front of live audiences and creating quotes attached to photos of our storytellers and putting that as content for the time capsule. So we'll be generating content for the time capsule this way and then have other opportunities like a do-it-yourself model for anyone who may be interested in free writing about their LGBTQ experience, 1 page or so, and sending it with a picture. You can find more information about that, or you can email me at wes@thegenerationsproject.info. And I'm happy to assist you. But we're looking to generate all of our own content. And the Stonewall 50 time capsule will be stored for 50 years until the 100th anniversary of Stonewall in the year 2069. So it's essentially a gift for the future organizers of the 100th anniversary of Stonewall, where people who contribute to the time capsule will be recorded, and anyone related to them or who they acknowledge can at least view what they put into the time capsule.
That's really cool. And I like this time capsule idea, like the ones you talked about where you open them from time to time as a way of bringing community together. I think I may try to pass that on to my local community.
Yeah, it's something I'm really interested in. I'm speaking to a lot of potential funders about. I believe creating time capsule gatherings of all different kinds of time capsules really are really impactful for the community and a really great way to not only build community, but preserve history that may otherwise be lost. It's a really fun, beautiful thing. And you're right, the magic is when you open the time capsule. And that's why we created this one that's every year and every 4 years. Now we're going big for a 50-year time capsule, which I've never done before, but it's really interesting and fun to potentially create a tradition that will have a time capsule that could be open every 50 years for who knows how long. But that's the goal and the intention.
Well, Wes, it's been great having you on the show. I want to thank you again for sharing your time with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I would love to hear what you thought about this interview. Please send me email at grainrainbows@gmail.com or leave a voice feedback at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis. I really enjoyed talking with Wes Enos about the Generations Project. This is one of many innovative projects that are popping up in the rainbow community. To me, it is encouraging to know that there are actually many younger people interested in preserving the stories of our elders. Also, Wes's personal story shows how an individual can make a big difference. How does the Generations Project relate to those of us who are new to the LGBT plus community? Obviously, we have much to gain from participating in these sorts of activities within our own communities, but I think it's important to realize that we have an important voice to contribute. As young people hear about what it was like to be LGBT plus in the past, we can share what things were like from the other side, so to speak. Now that coming out is considered the norm, I think it's critical that younger people understand that there were many forces keeping people in the closet. Of course, the reality is that there are still many people in the straight community that do not accept the scientific evidence that diversity in gender and sexuality is normal and a part of the diversity of being human. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge that many of you may never have the opportunity to be fully out. But the goal of this show is to remind you that you are not alone and hopefully provide a resource for you wherever you are on your journey. Part of my vision for Graying Rainbows is to share stories from listeners from around the world. If you are interested in sharing your story, just email me and we will discuss what format would be best for you. The choices range from sharing an anonymous email to a full-blown interview. Also, don't forget you can connect with us via the Graying Rainbows Facebook page or send me a request to join our private Facebook group. Which reminds me, I know I owe many of you an apology for being so slow to respond to your Facebook requests. I work as a palliative medicine physician at the VA hospital in Birmingham, Alabama, and during the weeks I'm on duty, I can barely manage email. I sometimes look at Twitter, but I tend to avoid Facebook beyond looking at things posted by my nieces. Moving forward, I will try to do better, since right now I don't know of a better tool than Facebook, but I am open to suggestions. Before I tell you how you can win an Amazon gift certificate, I want to introduce a new feature where I share one thing about my personal journey, about my personal coming out journey. Because I record some episodes several weeks in advance, there's going to be a time lag, but I hope you'll find this interesting and maybe helpful. As I mentioned, I live in Birmingham, Alabama, which is a very conservative place overall. But we do have some wonderful LGBT plus resources, mostly focused on helping younger people. I'm trying to take advantage of opportunities to participate in my local community. So recently, I attended my first meeting of PFLAG, which stands for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. This organization, PFLAG, has been around since the 70s. It was founded by a mother who had a gay son. But the thing that's unique about PFLAG is that it's open to everyone. And the typical meeting contains both people who identify as LGBT as well as parents and grandparents who are trying to learn how to support their loved ones. If you aren't familiar with PFLAG, just Google it. It's kind of like AA in that there are chapters everywhere, even in many small towns. In my case, I'm hoping to meet more people, but if you have a loved one who is struggling with your coming out, this is something you could do together. As I mentioned last week, one thing you can do to help Graying Rainbows grow is to post a review in iTunes. To show my appreciation for the extra effort this requires, I'm giving away Amazon gift certificates. I plan to give away one gift certificate each week to the first person who sends a screenshot to grayingrainbows@gmail.com. Everyone else will go into the monthly drawing. Once you're entered, you will remain eligible every month until you win. That's it for now. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back with you next Monday. Graying Rainbows is copyright Virginia Campbell, MD. You can copy this show to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at grayingrainbows@gmail.com.